The sun hung low over Dry Creek, a blistered, dust-caked frontier town clawed out of the desert by men too stubborn to leave and too mean to die. Heat shimmered off cracked earth, turning the distant canyons into wavering ghosts. Along the crooked main street, splintered buildings leaned like old men too weary to stand straight, their windows clouded, their signs faded. But it was the center of town, where the rough-hewn platform had been raised, that held every eye. A crowd had gathered, a patchwork of ranchers, drifters, bounty men, and outlaws. Some spat tobacco into the dust. Others drank from weathered flasks, their faces etched with equal parts sun and sin. Atop the platform, a thick-set man named Cyrus Vane presided over the auction with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. He wore a battered black hat and a coat dark with old blood at the cuffs. His voice cut through the still air like a snake's hiss. "Next up, gents, the last one o' the night," he called, dragging out each word. "A real prize. Don't let that size fool you. She's sturdy as a fence post and twice as useful." A pair of men hauled the girl onto the platform. She looked no older than 17, though her face spoke of years she hadn't lived. Hollow eyes, skin like porcelain left out in the wind too long. Her hair hung in a tangle, and her dress was little more than burlap stitched to cover what decency she had left. The crowd murmured. Some laughed. A few stared in uneasy silence. They called her Mercy, though no one could say if that was a cruel joke or the truth. Rumor hung around her like dust, that she'd walked out of the Roan Ridge massacre with blood on her hands and no memory of how it got there. Some claimed she spoke to ghosts. Others said she didn't speak at all. Cyrus grabbed her chin and turned her face to the crowd. "She'll fetch a fine price, boys. Starting at $20. A man with a stitched-up jaw raised a hand. "20. 30. Came a slurred voice from near the saloon. 40. The numbers rose, slow and mocking. Not a soul there bid out of kindness. They wanted her for their own reasons, none of them decent. It was then the stranger appeared. He came riding an old roan horse, the beast as gray and bone-thin as its rider. Dust clung to him like a second skin. His hat was wide-brimmed, shadowing his face, but the townsfolk saw enough to start murmuring. Some swore he was dead. Others claimed they'd seen him years back, riding with a company of gunmen that vanished into the Badlands. He rode straight to the platform without a word. His presence was a storm cloud in the heat, drawing every gaze. Cyrus scowled. "This ain't your business, old man." The stranger looked up, eyes sharp and pale beneath the hat's brim. His voice was low, a rasp of wind through canyon rocks. "I'll bet 100. The crowd went dead silent. Cyrus's grin faltered. "You got that kind o' money?" The stranger reached into his coat, pulled a small leather pouch, and tossed it at the platform. The weight of it spoke for itself. Cyrus licked his lips, feigning cheer. "Well now, we got ourselves a fine gent. You claiming her as kin." There was a pause. The girl's eyes found the stranger's, and something passed between them. Not recognition, but something deeper, older than memory. "She's not my daughter," the old man said, his words slow and heavy. "She feels like my mother." A ripple went through the crowd, a mix of confusion and uneasy laughter. "Suit yourself, old fool," Cyrus spat, waving a hand. "She's yours." The rope binding Mercy's wrists was cut, and she stumbled forward. The stranger caught her by the arm, steadying her. Her skin was cold, her gaze wary, but she didn't flinch. As they turned to leave, a drunk from the crowd stepped forward, bottle in hand. "Hey, stranger," he slurred, leering at Mercy. "You paying that much? Maybe you'll let a man have a taste first." The crowd chuckled, and a few men moved in, more boldness than sense between them. The stranger didn't speak. He didn't draw. He simply moved. In the space of a breath, his hand snapped out, seizing the drunk's wrist. There was a crack, a howl, and the bottle clattered to the ground. In the same motion, the old man twisted the outlaw's arm behind his back and drove him face first into the dust. The onlookers fell silent. Even Cyrus said nothing, sensing something older than frontier law at play. The stranger let the man crawl away and swung into his saddle. He reached down and pulled Mercy up behind him. Without another word, They rode out of town, the setting sun casting long shadows in their wake. And as Dry Creek watched them go, no one laughed. They rode in silence, the wind a dry whisper through the mesquite and sage. The stranger's horse moved steady as a ghost, hooves kicking up little clouds of dust in the dying light. Mercy clung to the back of the saddle, arms tight around the old man's waist, though neither spoke a word nor made a sound beyond the breath in their lungs. The desert spread out before them in all its cruel majesty, jagged ridges like the spines of buried beasts, gnarled trees twisting toward a sky bruised purple and gold. Coyotes yipped far off, their voices thin and sharp as knives. Somewhere, a hawk rode the last of the thermals. The stranger did not head for the road, nor for the river trail. He cut west, toward the canyons, where only men with death wishes or dark pasts dared roam. Mercy knew enough of the land to understand what that meant. She didn't ask. She didn't have to. After an hour, the old man drew up beside a crooked Joshua tree, its limbs like outstretched, skeletal arms. A trickle of water seeped from a rock nearby, pooling in a shallow hollow. He dismounted and helped her down. His touch was firm, careful, neither cruel nor kind, but practiced. He led her to the water and let her drink. She knelt, her cracked lips trembling as she cupped the muddy liquid. It tasted of earth and root, but it was wet, and that was all that mattered. The stranger crouched nearby, rolling a thin smoke between his fingers. His face caught what little light remained, lean, weathered, a road map of old scars. His eyes, though, were what fixed her, pale gray, sharp as glass, with a weight behind them not born from years alone. After a long moment, he spoke. "Name's Elias Boone." The words came like stones dropped in a still pond. She looked up, unsure if he expected her to answer. "I used to ride with a crew called the White Mesa Boys," he went on. "Long time ago. Before your kind was born, maybe. We were killers, every one of us. Men without mercy." The irony of her name didn't escape her. She said nothing, only listened. "One summer, we took a job south of the border. Easy money, they said. Burn a village, run off the survivors, leave no witnesses." He stared into the dusk, as if watching something only he could see. "We did what we were paid to do. Killed every man, every boy. Left the women to a worse fate." Mercy's stomach tightened. She'd known men like that. Or at least, she'd seen what they left behind. "But there was one woman," Boone said, his voice softer now, like a prayer spoken over a grave. "Old, eyes like smoke. She cursed us. Said none of us would die clean. Said the ground itself would remember what we did, that we'd ride until we paid the debt in full." Mercy swallowed hard, the air thick with old, bitter things. The wind tugged at her hair. Inside a year, every man in that crew was dead. Shot, hanged, poisoned. Some just vanished. I ran north, kept running. But the curse, it don't leave you. He took a long draw from his smoke, exhaled into the dark. "I seen you before," he admitted. "Not you, but what you carry. That look in your eye. Like you ain't sure if you're alive or not." She finally spoke, her voice brittle as dry grass. "They say I come from Roan Ridge, that my people were slaughtered." He nodded. "I heard of it. Only one survived, so the stories go. A girl. Said she went mad after, walked right into a nest of Comancheros, came out with their scalps and no memory." "I don't remember," she whispered. "You remember what matters," Boone said, tapping his chest. "It stays here, whether you want it or not." She hugged her knees, the night pressing in. "Why'd you buy me?" Boone didn't answer right away. He finished his smoke, ground the stub under his boot. The coyotes howled again, closer this time. "'Cause you feel like my mother," he said at last. She frowned, confusion knitting her brow. She was a hard woman. Survived worse than men can dream of. Folks said she was born in a storm, carried a knife before she could speak. She didn't give life easy, and when she went, the world felt colder. He looked over at her, a flicker of something almost gentle in those granite eyes. "I see her in you. That same fire. Not gone out yet, even if you think it is." The words settled between them, neither warm nor cruel, but true. Mercy stared at the dark horizon. You mean to kill me? No, Boone said. I mean to give you a choice. She turned to face him. Men like Cyrus, towns like Dry Creek, they don't end. You can run from M your whole life, or you can stand up. Make M remember your face. I ain't got a gun, she said. You will. They sat in silence, the understanding heavier than the desert night. Mercy felt something inside her shift, not a sudden thing, but like the slow cracking of a frost-covered branch. Boone stood and started saddling the horse. We ride at first light. There's a place. An old stone house in the canyon. Belonged to a woman once. A healer. She left things behind. Things you'll need. Mercy rose, brushing dust from her ragged dress. And then, Boone said, with the ghost of a grim smile, we go hunting. The coyotes howled again, and this time Mercy wasn't afraid. Dawn broke like a bloodstain across the horizon, the sun rising red and mean over the hills beyond Dry Creek. The town lay quiet in those early hours, its crooked main street littered with windblown debris and the footprints of men with bad intentions. A lone dog slunk through the dust, ribs showing, ears twitching at each groan of the wooden signs swaying overhead. Cyrus Kane's saloon squatted at the end of the street, like a fat spider in its web, doors half open, the scent of stale whiskey and sweat thick on the air. Upstairs, behind shuttered windows, the girls stirred from uneasy sleep. Downstairs, the men who hadn't passed out grunted as they cleaned their guns and emptied their bottles. Elias Boone rode into town as the sun cleared the ridge, a tall, lean figure in a trail-stained duster. His horse's hooves clopped steady and unhurried against the packed earth. Behind him rode Mercy, her face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, eyes hard as flint. The dress she'd worn at the auction was gone, replaced by a rough-spun shirt and trousers that hung loose on her frame. At her hip, a Colt Navy rested in a worn holster, its handle dull from use. The townsfolk watched them come. Faces peeked from behind curtains. An old man at the livery spat into the dirt and crossed himself. Nobody spoke. Nobody challenged. Boone brought his horse to a halt in front of the saloon and dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with the weight of finality. Mercy followed, her fingers brushing the revolver's grip like a nervous tick she hadn't yet shaken. A tall man stepped out onto the boardwalk, Cyrus Kane, the auctioneer and self-appointed law of Dry Creek. His hair was silver at the temples, but his shoulders were broad, his eyes sharp and hungry. The pistol at his side gleamed in the morning light. He smiled like a rattlesnake. Well now, Kane drawled. Didn't figure you for the sentimental type, Boone. Fetching back damaged goods. A few of his men snickered behind him, the sound brittle as dry bones. Boone's voice was steady, low. You sold her like livestock, Kane. She was mine to sell. Kane shrugged. Ain't no law against it this far from the territories. Boone stepped closer, the space between them shrinking like the last breath in a dying man's chest. Ain't no law but the one we make, right? Kane's grin faltered, a flicker of caution in his gaze. Mercy's voice cut through the morning air. He ain't here for talking, Cyrus. Every head turned to her. The girl they'd beaten, auctioned, humiliated, now standing straight-backed, a gun at her side, her face hard as hammered steel. Kane's lip curled. You come looking for a grave, girl? No, she said, her voice like the edge of a whetstone. I come to dig one. The street held its breath. One of Kane's men, a wiry brute named Hatch, reached for his pistol. The first shot cracked like a thunderclap. Hatch's hand never cleared leather before Boone's bullet took him clean between the eyes. The outlaw fell like a sack of flour, dust rising in a pale cloud. Chaos erupted. Kane dove for cover as his men scrambled. Boone fired again, and another man dropped, clutching his chest. Mercy moved without thought, her revolver raised, firing into the cluster of men. She felt the weapon buck in her hand, the smell of burnt powder sharp in her nose. A bullet grazed Boone's shoulder, tearing fabric and flesh. He grunted, spun, and dropped another attacker. The townsfolk scattered, ducking behind wagons and barrels. A woman screamed as a stray round shattered a window overhead. Kane's voice bellowed from behind a wagon. Kill 'em both. Mercy crouched by the hitching post, reloading with trembling fingers. Boone knelt beside her, blood darkening his sleeve. "You sure about this, girl?" he asked, teeth gritted against the pain. She snapped the cylinder shut. "I was born for it." Boone chuckled grimly. "That's my mother's voice." The battle surged around them. Boone rose, his rifle a blur as he fired and ducked, his movements those of a man who'd seen 1,000 gunfights and lived by fractions of seconds. Mercy followed, moving toward the saloon, her shots precise, her heart hammering but steady. Inside the building, 3 men took cover. Boone kicked open the door, gun roaring. One fell instantly, the other 2 scrambled for their lives. Mercy shot one through the throat, the last bolting out the back door. Boone collapsed against the bar, panting, blood seeping down his arm. "You all right?" Mercy nodded, her face streaked with grime and sweat. "Where's Kane?" A voice called from the street. "I'm right here." They stepped outside to find Kane standing alone, his pistol aimed, a snarl twisting his face. A single shot had bloodied his lip, but his grip was steady. "It was always going to be you, Boone." Kane spat. "I knew you'd crawl back one day." Boone raised his Colt. Time to settle the debt. A hush fell over the street. Even the wind seemed to pause. Mercy moved to Boone's side. "This one's mine." Boone hesitated, then lowered his weapon. Kane laughed, a dry, joyless sound. "You, a skinny little whore." Mercy stepped forward. "I ain't a whore, and I ain't little." Kane raised his gun. Mercy fired. The shot struck him in the heart, the impact jerking him backward. He collapsed in the dust, his final breath rattling from his throat like a dying animal. Silence followed. The townsfolk emerged slowly, the fear in their eyes giving way to awe. Boone holstered his gun. "It's done." Mercy looked down at Kane's body, something cold and heavy settling in her bones. "Not yet." She turned to the gathered crowd. "No more auctions. No more girls chained and sold. Any man who lays hands on a woman in this town answers to me." No one argued. An old woman stepped forward, her face lined like a riverbed. She nodded once, slow and certain. Boone touched the brim of his hat to Mercy. "Reckon you don't need me no more." She gave him a tired, crooked smile. "Reckon you're wrong." He grinned, the ghost of the outlaw he'd been. "Then let's clean this place up." As the sun climbed higher, Dry Creek changed. The bodies were buried, the saloon shuttered. Mercy took up the sheriff's badge that no man had dared wear in years. Boone rode out at dusk, leaving behind a town that would, for the first time, sleep without fear. And in the canyons, the wind carried word of a girl with a gun and a curse in her blood, who made the desert remember her name. Night settled over Dry Creek like a black velvet shroud, the stars sharp and cold above the battered town. The gun smoke had long since cleared, and the scent of blood lingered only in memory, clinging to the walls of the saloon and the warped boards of the gallows. Mercy sat alone by the dying fire outside the old sheriff's office, a tin badge resting in her palm, its surface dulled by time and the sweat of too many trembling hands. The wind stirred the coals, sending tiny sparks drifting up into the darkness. Mercy watched them rise, her face unreadable, eyes reflecting the orange glow. She hadn't spoken since the last body was buried. The townsfolk had gathered at sunset, a hasty prayer mumbled, the earth turned over, and the past shoved down into the cold dirt. But not for her. The past clung tight. Footsteps approached from the gloom, slow and deliberate. Boone's silhouette appeared by the edge of the light, a bundle of saddlebags slung over one shoulder, his coat catching the breeze like a tattered flag. He stopped a few paces from her and said nothing. Mercy didn't look up. "Thought you'd be halfway to Tucson by now." Boone squatted by the fire, his bones cracking with the movement. Didn't figure it was right, leaving things unfinished. A brittle smile ghosted across her lips. "You already did enough." "I did what I owed," he said quietly, "but I reckon there's more you ought to know." Mercy finally turned to him, the light catching in her eyes, pale and fierce. "I don't need stories, Elias. I need peace." "This ain't a story," he replied, reaching into his coat and pulling out a yellowed photograph. The edges were curled, the image faded, but Mercy recognized the face. A woman with eyes like hers, a softer mouth, and hair the color of wheat at harvest. I found this in my mother's things when I was a boy, Boone said, his voice rough with old wounds. Never knew what it meant. My father wouldn't speak of her. Said she was a ghost. Said bad blood ran through her veins. Mercy took the picture with a trembling hand. Her throat tightened. The woman in the photograph, she'd seen her face before. In the slivered fragments of dreams she barely remembered. A lullaby half remembered. A touch on her hair in the night. She was your mother, too, Boone said, watching her with those storm-gray eyes. My half-sister. Mercy stared at him, the ground tilting under her. No, that ain't possible. It is, Boone murmured. Your ma ran west when she was carrying you. Left my old man in Kansas and vanished. Folks figured she died, or worse. But Cain found her, made her his own, kept her chained like he kept everything else. Mercy shook her head, though some part of her already believed. The likeness in the photo, the ache she'd carried without knowing why. Then why'd you buy me? 'Cause when I saw you on that stage, it wasn't a girl I saw, Boone said, voice thick with memory. It was her. The way she stood. The same fire in your eyes. You looked at me like she did when my father'd raise his hand. And I knew if I walked away, I'd be no better than him. The weight of it settled over them, thick and suffocating. Mercy felt the badge in her hand like an anchor. Why didn't you say it before? She whispered. Didn't think you'd want to know. Thought maybe it'd be kinder if you didn't carry that blood. She laughed then, a hollow, broken thing. Ain't much of me left to ruin, Elias. For a long time neither spoke. The fire crackled, and the desert stretched out around them, vast and silent. Finally, Mercy rose, tucking the photograph inside her coat. She stared out toward the hills, where darkness pressed against the world's edge. So what now? Boone followed her gaze. Now you run this town. Make it yours. Rewrite what folks think a sheriff ought to be. And you, I got ghosts need settling to, he said, standing. Other towns, other men like Cain. She nodded slowly, a quiet acceptance between them. The past had twisted their blood and memory, but it didn't have to chain their future. I'll leave a light burning for you, Elias, she said, her voice steady now. Boone smiled, a weathered thing, more sorrow than joy. And I'll come find it, Mercy, when the road's done. He turned and walked into the darkness, his shape swallowed by the night. Mercy watched him go until he was no more than a shadow against the hills. She turned back to the fire, lifting the badge and pinning it to her chest. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of sage and dust. Somewhere a coyote howled, a lonely, aching sound. Mercy Boone stood alone, sheriff of Dry Creek, her blood her own, and a storm in her heart. Years passed like wind over the high plains, wearing down stone and memory alike. Dry Creek changed, as towns do when the blood dries and men's names slip from the lips of their children's children. New timbers rose where the old gallows had stood, and the saloon was rebuilt with fresher wood, its name painted bright and proud above the doors. The land still bore scars, but people no longer spoke of them by daylight. It was the way of the frontier, death made quick, memory made quiet. But at night, when the desert wind moaned through the canyons and the stars burned cold and sharp, the old stories surfaced like bones in shifting earth. And always, they came back to her. Mercy Boone. Folks still argued whether Boone was her true name or the one she took after the last bloodletting. Some said she'd been born from smoke and vengeance the night the Cain gang fell. Others claimed she was a ghost in a woman's skin, sent by whatever old gods still watched over lost places. None who'd faced her would deny what she became. The law when no one else would claim it. The reckoning when no one else dared. Children in Dry Creek grew up hearing the tale. How the girl sold at auction became the woman no man could buy. How she stared down a dozen guns and sent their owners to the cold earth with a steady hand. They spoke of the stranger, too, Elias Boone, the drifter with storm-gray eyes who came and went like a shadow. Some claimed he was her brother, others her cursed lover. The truth, as ever, lay buried deeper than most cared to dig. The town flourished under Mercy's watch. Outlaws steered clear of its borders, and even the land itself seemed to lean in closer. the wind favoring her name. Ranchers found their herds less often rustled, stagecoaches arrived on time, and saloons learned better than to cheat a man too far. The badge on her chest gathered neither rust nor dust. But the world beyond Dry Creek kept turning. The railroads pushed westward like steel serpents, and with them came men hungrier than the desert, men with suits instead of six-shooters. Land deeds replaced gunfights, and silver spoke louder than bullets. It was a subtler kind of violence, one Mercy understood too well. She held it at bay with grit and the reputation she'd earned in blood, but even legends know when the world is shifting beneath their boots. One evening, a rider appeared at the edge of town. Dust coated his coat and hat, and his face was lined like old paper. Mercy, older now, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes sharp as ever, met him on the porch of the sheriff's office. "You Elias Boone's kin?" she asked, noting the cut of his jaw and the familiar set of his shoulders. The man dismounted, tipping his hat. "Name's Caleb Boone. My uncle spoke of you." Mercy leaned against a post, the setting sun turning the sky to fire behind her. Elias still breathing. "Last I saw he was," Caleb said, his gaze steady. "He told me if I was to run afoul of men worse than wolves, this was the place to ride." Mercy let a slow smile crack the weathered skin of her face. "You're late. Wolves been thick these days." Caleb glanced over his shoulder at the horizon. "Not wolves, ma'am. Worse. Pinkertons. Men hired by the railroad. They're stringing up folks don't want to sell. Driving ranchers off land been theirs since before statehood. There's a storm coming." Mercy spat into the dust. "Ain't it always?" The younger Boone stepped closer, his voice low. "They say you're a legend, that you made devils bleed and outdrew Cain himself." "They say a lot of things," Mercy said. "Some true, most not. What matters is what a person does when the shooting starts." "I was hoping you might ride with me." The words hung between them, an old tune Mercy hadn't heard in too long. Her bones ached, her hands stiff from too many winters, but her spirit stirred like dry grass catching flame. She studied the boy, seeing the ghost of Elias in his eyes and the weight of blood on his shoulders. "Frontiers changing," she said quietly. "Men like me, with the last of a breed." "Then all the more reason to fight," Caleb replied. She held his gaze a moment longer, then pushed off the post and retrieved the battered rifle leaning by the door. "Leave before dawn. We'll ride light, hit him fast." Caleb grinned, something wild and fierce in it. "Yes, ma'am." As he turned to make ready, Mercy stepped inside the office one last time. The walls were lined with relics, old wanted posters, a dented star-shaped badge, a faded photograph of a woman with eyes like hers. She took the badge, ran a thumb over its pitted surface, and pinned it to her coat. The fire in her heart, banked for years, blazed anew. She was no girl from the auction block, no man's prize or prisoner. She was the storm on the horizon, the reckoning old men warned their sons about. The next morning, 2 riders departed Dry Creek, their figures shrinking against the vast emptiness. The townsfolk watched them go in silence, knowing some battles weren't fought for land or gold, but for the sheer stubborn defiance of men and women who refused to be tamed. And in the years to follow, when night stretched long and the wind whispered through Dry Creek streets, folk spoke of them. Mercy Boone and the last of the Boones, riding into legend, carrying with them the ragged, indomitable spirit of the frontier. They would say she was born in blood and fire, tempered by sorrow, and forged by justice, that when the world forgot how to stand its ground, she reminded it. And in the end, the land itself bent to her will, carrying her name in the dust and wind for as long as the desert remembered. And so the frontier had its legend, not a lawman nor a preacher, not a soldier nor a thief, but a woman with a storm in her soul and the blood of 2 families at war with the world. A woman who faced down death, defied the chains of her birth, and claimed the land's last unbroken peace for her own. Mercy Boone, sheriff of Dry Creek, the last of the wild law.